A 6-year-old girl languished in cruel isolation and daily emotional neglect, her vulnerable soul wilting under her stepmother's mask of perfection. But a silent raven, witness to all the neglect, prepared to unravel the Gothic truth that haunted the mansion, revealing the cruelty of the woman who feigned virtue. Morning light filtered through the silk curtains of the master suite, revealing Sophia in her immaculate morning routine. Her blonde hair, always perfectly coiffed, framed a face that displayed a serene, almost angelic beauty. She wore a silk robe that fell softly over her slender body, and her movements were graceful, calculated. At breakfast in the vast dining room, she was the perfect hostess, the attentive wife whom Arthur, absorbed in his business and the complexity of his fortune, would never suspect. "Good morning, my love," she would say to Arthur, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Did you sleep well?" But the mask dropped as soon as Arthur left for work, or when his attention turned elsewhere. The mansion, once filled with a false aura of warmth, transformed into a labyrinth of oppressive silence for little Alice. Alice, with her 6 years and large, curious eyes, spent most of the day confined to her room under the justification of playing alone or learning to be independent. Sophia rarely sought her out, and when she did, it was with a chilling coldness that pierced the girl's soul. "Alice, dear," Sophia's voice echoed through the hallway, but there was no affection in it, only a veiled tone of command. "Don't make noise. Grandpa Elias needs rest and I have my chores. Go play with your dolls. Don't bother me." The girl, sitting on the floor of her room, hugged a worn teddy bear, her small shoulders slumped. The dolls lay untouched, silent witnesses to a stolen childhood. The isolation was an invisible prison, and emotional neglect, a slow poison that drained her joy. She yearned for a hug, a kind word, but Sophia offered only absence. The hours dragged on, each minute a heavy burden for the child's heart. Meanwhile, downstairs, Mr. Elias, Arthur's father, languished in his armchair, his mind lucid but his body frail. His blue eyes, once full of life, now carried a deep melancholy. He needed his heart medication, a strict regimen that Sophia was supposed to administer. But the bottles on the bedside table remained untouched for days, or were replaced by placebos when Arthur was around to maintain the charade. "Sophia, my dear," he called, his voice trembling, almost a whisper, "my medicine. I feel a bit weak today." Sophia, passing by the room's door with a tea tray for herself, barely paused. "Oh, Grandpa, you've already taken it, haven't you?" "I'm sure you have. Your memory is a bit faulty, isn't it? Let me see. Ah, yes, the bottle seems almost empty. I'll ask them to refill it." She smiled, an empty smile that didn't reach her eyes, and continued on her way. Mr. Elias knew it was a lie. The bottle was empty because she didn't refill it, because she didn't give him the necessary doses. He felt the weakness growing, his chest tightening, but Sophia's voice was the law in that house. He was a prisoner of his own fragility and his daughter-in-law's veiled cruelty. Outside, perched on the highest branch of an ancient oak that dominated the garden, Poe the raven watched. His black eyes, like two polished obsidian beads, missed not a single detail. He saw the girl huddled in her room, heard the old man's faint calls. He saw Sophia's elegant figure, the woman who seemed so perfect, but who exuded a glacial aura of malevolence. Poe was a shadow, a Gothic guardian, and with each passing day, with each act of silent cruelty, the dark loyalty that propelled him grew stronger. He waited, patiently, for the right moment to unravel the truth. The mansion, for many a symbol of wealth and happiness, was, for Poe, a stage where tragedy unfolded, and he would be the harbinger of its revelation. The afternoon sun painted the mansion's stained-glass windows with warm colors, but within the walls, the light seemed not to reach the darkest corners. Alice, sitting on the plush carpet of her room, tried to bring a drawing to life. Her colored pencils, vibrant in their boxes, seemed pale in her hands. She drew a large house with a flowering garden, but the windows of the house were empty, without faces, without smiles. There was a small, solitary figure in the corner with a grey cloud over her head, herself. "Alice, dear, you're not making noise, are you?" Sophia's voice, though muffled by the door, carried the same icy tone as always. "Grandpa needs silence, and I have a terrible migraine. Be a good girl and play quietly." Alice gripped the blue pencil, almost breaking the tip. She wanted to scream, she wanted to run, she wanted a hug, but she knew that any louder sound would result in an even colder reprimand, a look that would make her shrink even further. The dolls, arranged in an impeccable row against the wall, seemed to watch her with glass eyes, as silent and motionless as she felt compelled to be. Silence was a constant companion, an echo of her own loneliness. Elias felt the weight of neglect like a heavy cloak. Weakness was an old acquaintance, but in recent days it had become more insistent, more oppressive. He tried to get up from the armchair to go to the window, but his legs trembled, and a sudden dizziness forced him to sit down again, his heart beating erratically. "Sophia!" he called, his voice stronger than usual, propelled by growing panic. "Sophia, please, my medicine. I haven't taken it today. I feel very unwell." Sophia, who was in the adjacent living room, idly flipping through a decorating magazine, sighed audibly. She rose with studied elegance and went to her father-in-law's bedroom door without entering. "Grandpa, we've talked about this," she said, with a tone of false patience that was more irritating than open anger. "You took your medicine. I saw it myself on the bedside table. Your memory, sometimes plays tricks on us. Don't worry so much. It's just a little tiredness." She pointed to the empty bottle that lay on the bedside table, the same bottle she hadn't refilled for days, the same one that served as silent proof of her cruelty. Mr. Elias looked at the bottle, then at Sophia's face, which displayed a condescending smile. He knew it was a blatant lie, a cruel manipulation. The pain in his chest intensified, but there was nothing he could do. He was an old, frail man, and she the guardian of his life. Outside in the oak, Poe observed the scene through the half-open window. His black eyes caught the exchange, the blatant lie, the old man's silent despair. He saw the empty bottle, irrefutable proof of Sophia's cruelty, a spark of something dark and determined ignited in his gaze. The loyalty that bound him to that family, an ancient and mysterious loyalty, was reaching its limit. Later, Arthur came home, tired from a long day of meetings. Sophia greeted him with a soft kiss and a radiant smile. "My love, how was your day?" she asked, her voice melodic. "Dinner is almost ready. I prepared your favorite dish." Arthur returned the kiss, but a wrinkle of concern furrowed his brow. "It was exhausting, Sophia, but I'm more worried about my father. He seems so frail lately. I went to see him for a moment before coming up, and he looked a bit pale. Are you sure he's taking all his medicine?" Sophia took Arthur's hand, squeezing it affectionately. "Of course, my love. I administer them myself. He's an elderly man, Arthur. It's natural for his health to fluctuate. But don't worry, I'm taking care of everything. Perhaps he just needs a good rest and a nutritious dinner. How about a family dinner tomorrow night? It would be good for him and for Alice, don't you think? A moment for us to gather." Arthur smiled, relieved by his wife's apparent dedication. "Yes, Sophia, that's a great idea. A family dinner. It would be perfect." Poe, who had flown to a branch closer to the dining room window, heard the words, "a family dinner." The moment was approaching. His eyes, like two obsidian beads, fixed on the empty bottle that Sophia had left on Mr. Elias's bedside table. The truth was about to be revealed, and he would be the messenger. The morning after the announcement of the family dinner, the mansion seemed to breathe a false expectation. Sophia, in her pearl-colored silk robe, came down for breakfast with an air of renewed dedication. "Good morning, my love," she said to Arthur, who was already reading the newspaper at the vast dining table. "Did you sleep well? I prepared fresh juice for you." Her smile was impeccable. Her eyes, however, maintained the same calculated coldness. Arthur, absorbed in financial market news, barely noticed the absence of warmth. "Perfect, Sophia, thank you. And tonight's dinner? Have you thought about the menu?" "Of course, dear. Something light and elegant. Grandpa Elias needs something nutritious. And Alice, well, she always likes a good pasta dish, doesn't she?" The mention of Alice was almost an aside, a minor detail in her elaborate performance. As Arthur prepared to leave, Sophia paid a brief visit to Alice's room. The girl was sitting on the floor, trying to assemble a 1,000-piece puzzle, an ambitious task for her 6 years, but one that kept her busy and, more importantly, quiet. "Alice, dear," Sophia said, without fully entering the room, "I'm organizing dinner tonight. You'll behave, won't you? No noise, no interruptions. It's an important family moment, and please don't get dirty. I want you to be impeccable." Her voice was soft, but the message was clear. Be invisible, be perfect, don't be a child. Alice merely nodded, her eyes downcast, her small hand trembling slightly as she fitted a piece. The dinner, which should have been a moment of togetherness, seemed more like a performance she was forced to watch, not participate in. Downstairs, Mr. Elias felt the weight of every hour that passed without his medication. The weakness that was once intermittent was now a constant, a grey veil over his mind and body. His heart seemed to beat with an irregular rhythm, and breathing became more difficult. He tried to call Sophia again, but his voice was a hoarse whisper. He saw his bedroom door ajar, and on the bedside table the empty bottle, a silent mockery. That bottle, which should have contained his salvation, was now the symbol of his condemnation. Sophia, oblivious or purposefully ignorant to her father-in-law's increasing suffering, was in the living room, reviewing the floral arrangements for dinner. She passed by Mr. Elias's room, and her eyes fell on the empty bottle. A small, almost imperceptible smile appeared on her lips. She picked it up, turning it between her fingers, feeling its light weight. "Ah, Grandpa," she murmured to herself, with a tone of scorn. "So forgetful, but don't worry, I'll take care of everything." She placed the bottle back on the bedside table, visible but useless. Outside, Poe watched. Perched on the windowsill of Mr. Elias's room, he had witnessed the scene, his sharp black eyes fixed on the empty bottle. He had seen Sophia handle it, the coldness in her eyes, the cruelty in her gesture. The dark loyalty that propelled him reached a boiling point. The moment was ripe. The afternoon dragged on. Alice, in her room, put on the dress Sophia had set aside for her, a delicate white fabric that made her look even more fragile. She combed her hair herself, trying to be impeccable, but her eyes reflected a deep sadness. Downstairs, Mr. Elias, with the help of one of the maids, whom Sophia had instructed to merely help him get dressed, nothing more, was in the dining room armchair, pale and gasping. He could barely keep his head up, but Sophia insisted he be present for the good of the family. Arthur arrived home, changed his clothes, and came down for dinner, exuding an aura of tiredness, but also of expectation. "Father, how do you feel?" he asked, noticing Mr. Elias's pallor. Sophia intervened before the old man could answer. "He's a little tired, my love. Age, you know. But he's happy we're all together, aren't you, Grandpa?" She squeezed her father-in-law's shoulder with a gesture that seemed affectionate, but which he felt as pressure. Mr. Elias merely nodded weakly, unable to articulate a word. Alice came down the stairs, a small, ethereal figure in the white dress. She sat at the table, silent, her large eyes observing the scene as if it were a distant film. Dinner began. Sophia, at the center of the table, radiated a false cheerfulness, conversing animatedly with Arthur about his day, about plans for the mansion. She served the food with grace, the perfect wife and stepmother. But Arthur, between sips of wine, couldn't shake his concern for his father. "Father, are you sure you're well? You've barely touched your food." Mr. Elias tried to speak, but only a faint groan escaped his lips. His hand trembled as he tried to pick up his glass of water. Sophia, with a condescending smile, said, "He's just a little unwell, Arthur. Age, you know. But don't worry, he took his medicine. I saw them myself on his bedside table today." She cast a quick glance down the hallway leading to her father-in-law's room, as if to confirm her statement. At that exact moment, a sound of flapping wings filled the dining room. The window, which Sophia had left slightly open to air out the room, was the entry point. Poe, the observant raven, flew inside, his black eyes fixed on his target. He didn't land on the table immediately. First, he circled once over the heads of those present, a dark omen, before descending with calculated precision. His feet landed softly on the white linen tablecloth, right in the center of the table, between the silver cutlery and the floral arrangements. In his beak, he carried something small and cylindrical. With a deliberate movement, Poe deposited the object in front of Arthur, who had stopped speaking, his mouth slightly agape in shock. It was a medicine bottle, empty. The same bottle Sophia had manipulated, the same one Mr. Elias had seen on his bedside table. The irrefutable proof of Sophia's neglect lay there, silent and accusatory, under the raven's piercing gaze. The silence in the dining room was deafening, a dramatic pause that stretched for an eternity. Arthur, his mouth slightly open, couldn't tear his gaze from the small cylindrical bottle that lay on the linen tablecloth, so white and innocent, yet so laden with a dark truth. His eyes, previously filled with tiredness and expectation, now reflected a deep shock, an incredulity that fought against the irrefutable evidence. Sophia paled, the blood draining from her face as if an invisible tap had been opened. The condescending smile that had adorned her lips moments before vanished, giving way to an expression of pure horror, almost comical in its abrupt transformation. Her eyes, once cold and calculating, now danced in panic, fixed on the bottle, then on Arthur, then on the raven, as if seeking an escape route. Poe, the dark messenger, remained motionless in the center of the table, his talons firmly planted on the tablecloth, his black eyes, deep as night itself, fixed on Arthur, an almost human intelligence shining in them, as if awaiting comprehension. Arthur reached out hesitantly and picked up the bottle. It was light, empty. He turned it over, reading the label with his doctor's handwriting, his father's medication name, essential for his heart condition. The same bottle he had seen on Mr. Elias's bedside table. The same packaging Sophia had claimed to have refilled. "What? What is this, Sophia?" Arthur's voice was a hoarse whisper, almost unrecognizable, but laden with a cold fury that was beginning to ignite in his eyes. He wasn't asking what the bottle was, but what it meant. Sophia, recovering from the initial shock, tried to force a smile, a desperate attempt to regain control. "Arthur, my love, I don't know what you're talking about. It's just an old bottle. That bird. He must have picked it up from somewhere. How strange, isn't it?" Her voice was a little louder than normal, with a hysterical note she tried to disguise. "An old bottle?" Arthur repeated, his voice rising a tone, his gaze fixed on her. "This is my father's medicine, Sophia. The medicine you said you administered. The medicine you guaranteed he was taking." He looked at Mr. Elias, who was pale and gasping, his eyes teary, but with a glimmer of what seemed like relief and supplication. The old man nodded weakly, a silent confirmation that pierced Arthur's heart. But he took it, Sophia stammered, a mask of the perfect wife beginning to crumble. I was going to refill it today, Arthur. I swear he just finished it. It's natural for the bottle to be empty. Just finished it? Arthur stood up abruptly, his chair scraping the floor with a jarring sound. Father, how long has this bottle been empty? Mr. Ilias tried to speak, but weakness prevented him. He only managed to raise a trembling hand and point at Sophia, then made a gesture with his fingers, indicating days. The truth, silent and brutal, hung in the air. Alice, who had been watching the scene with wide eyes, squeezed her small hands under the table. She didn't fully understand the gravity of the situation, but she felt the tension, her father's anger, her stepmother's panic. She saw the raven, who looked like a dark guardian, and felt a thread of hope ignite in her small heart. Days, Arthur repeated, his voice now a contained thunder. He turned to Sophia. The empty bottle in his hand seemed like a hammer. You were depriving my father of his vital medication for days, while he was wasting away, while I was worrying. You were smiling and saying you were taking care of everything? Sophia recoiled, her eyes desperately searching for an escape, an excuse. No, Arthur, you're misunderstanding. I was busy. I was going to ask one of the staff to go to the pharmacy. It's just an oversight, my love, a small oversight. A small oversight? Arthur laughed, a bitter, humorless laugh. A small oversight that could have killed my father? A small oversight that left him frail and sick? And Alice? What else have you overlooked in this house, Sophia? The mention of Alice, almost a shout, made the girl shrink slightly, but also aroused a new attention in her. Arthur's gaze swept the room, stopping at the raven who still stared at him. He felt a pang of something inexplicable, as if the bird were a silent accomplice, a herald of justice. The Gothic truth had finally unfolded in all its cruelty. Sophia's facade completely collapsed, revealing the cold, calculating woman behind the mask. Arthur's fury was palpable, and the air in the dining room became heavy with the imminence of a storm. Arthur gripped the empty bottle in his hand, his knuckles white. His eyes, previously only furious, now burned with a deep pain, the pain of betrayal. It wasn't just the neglect of his father, but the lie, the manipulation, the facade of care that Sophia had maintained for so long. He felt a knot in his throat, a mixture of disgust and disillusionment. Oversight, Arthur repeated, the word spat out like venom. You call it an oversight to deprive an elderly, sick man of the medicine that keeps him alive? You call it an oversight to watch my father waste away day after day, while I trusted you, Sophia. You were slowly killing him. Sophia recoiled further, hitting her back against the wall. Her breathing was rapid, and her eyes swept the room, searching for an ally, a point of support, but found only Arthur's accusing gaze, Mr. Elias's heavy silence, and Alice's innocent curiosity. The raven, Poe, seemed to watch her with silent scorn, his black eyes fixed on her. "No, Arthur, please!" she pleaded, her voice choked. "I would never do that. I love your father. I respect him. I was so overwhelmed with the house, with the organization. I swear I was going to sort it out today. I was going to call the pharmacy." "Lies." Arthur's voice exploded, making Alice jump in her chair. "Lies, Sophia. You don't care about my father. You never cared. You saw him as a nuisance, didn't you? Another mouth to feed, another person to take care of while you enjoyed my fortune." Mr. Elias, with a superhuman effort, managed to rise slightly from his chair, his eyes fixed on Sophia with a mixture of fear and newfound courage. He shook his head slowly, a silent denial of her words, a silent confirmation of Arthur's accusations. Arthur turned to his father, his fury diminishing for an instant, replaced by overwhelming sadness. "Father, why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you say anything?" Mr. Elias, his voice weak and hoarse, managed to whisper, I tried, son. But she She was always around. She threatened me, said that if I told you, you would be angry with me, that I would be an even greater burden. His father's words struck Arthur like lightning. The fury he felt for Sophia multiplied, transforming into something cold and cutting. Threats. His father, an elderly and sick man, being threatened by his wife. And Alice? The earlier mention of Alice echoed in his mind. He turned to Sophia, his eyes burning with dangerous intensity. Threats? You threatened my father. And what else, Sophia? What else have you done in this house under my nose while I was blinded by your performance? Sophia was in total panic now. Her makeup was smeared with tears, and her elegant posture had collapsed into a crumpled, desperate figure. No, Arthur, I would never harm anyone. I just wanted you to love me, to see me as the perfect wife. Perfect wife? Arthur laughed humorlessly, a hollow, painful sound. You are an imposter, Sophia, a manipulator. And Alice? Tell me, Sophia, what have you done to Alice? How have you cared for my daughter? The direct mention of Alice made the girl shrink further, but she also looked up at her stepmother, a spark of fear and curiosity in her gaze. She remembered the long days of loneliness, the cold whispers, the disapproving looks. Sophia hesitated, her eyes quickly darting to Alice, then to the raven, who seemed to observe the scene with dark satisfaction. She knew that the truth about Alice was the last piece of her house of cards. Alice is a difficult child, Arthur, she began, trying to regain a more controlled tone of voice, but failing miserably. She's a bit rebellious. I was just trying to educate her, teach her to be a good girl. Educate her? Or isolate her? Or make her feel invisible? Arthur advanced, his voice low and dangerous. I saw it, Sophia. I saw her eyes. I felt the distance. I just didn't want to believe that the woman I loved could be so cruel. He stopped right in front of her, the empty bottle still in his hand, a symbol of her betrayal. You are not the woman I loved. You are a monster. And this house is no longer your place. Arthur's words cut through the air like sharp blades. Sophia staggered, her face contorted in a mixture of shock and despair. The raven Poe let out a low croak, almost inaudible, like a dark period to the revelation. The storm had arrived. No, Arthur, please, Sophia pleaded, tears streaming down her face, washing away her makeup and revealing the pallor of her skin. You're mistaken. I love Alice. I only wanted the best for her. She's a difficult child, yes, but I was trying to help her adapt, to be more well-behaved. Her voice was a desperate lament, a last attempt at manipulation that sounded hollow and false. Arthur shook his head, an expression of disgust etched on his face. Well-behaved. You locked her in her room, Sophia. You ignored her. You made her feel alone in her own home. I saw the fear in her eyes, the sadness. I wondered why my daughter, once so joyful, had become so withdrawn. And you, with your fake smile, said it was an adjustment phase. Arthur's voice rose a tone, pain mixing with anger. You weren't educating her, Sophia. You were breaking her. Alice, who had been watching everything in silence, felt a strange warmth in her chest. It was the first time her father had spoken about what she felt, about what Sophia did. She looked at Arthur, then at Poe, who seemed to nod in her direction, and a small, almost imperceptible flame of hope ignited in her eyes. No, I wasn't, Sophia shrieked, her voice now hysterical. I was just trying to maintain order. A child like her needs discipline, and your father, he's a grumpy old man who only complains. I couldn't stand his demands anymore, the medicine, the constant worries. I deserved some peace. The confession, uttered in desperation, was the last straw. Arthur felt a chill run down his spine. The naked truth, without the veneer of falsehood, was even more repugnant. Peace. You sought your peace by neglecting my father and abusing my daughter. Arthur's voice was a dangerous whisper, more threatening than any shout. You are sick, Sophia, a sociopath, and I was a fool for not seeing it sooner. He turned to Mr. Elias, who, though weak, seemed to have regained some dignity. The old man nodded, his eyes teary, but with an expression of relief Arthur had never seen before. Then Arthur looked at Alice, who stared at him with a mixture of fear and a new, tenuous hope. The sight of his daughter, so small and vulnerable, and the image of his father wasting away in silence, ignited a cold and unwavering fury in his heart. "Get out of this house, Sophia," Arthur declared, his voice firm and without hesitation. "Now, pack your things and leave. I never want to see you again. You are not welcome here." Sophia staggered back, struck by the finality of his words. "Arthur, please, don't do this. Where will I go? I have nowhere to go. I'm your wife." She tried to approach him, extending her hand, but Arthur recoiled, as if she were contagious. "You are not my wife," he corrected, his voice harsh. "You are a stranger who invaded my life and tried to destroy my family. I don't care where you go, but it won't be here. It won't be near my father, and above all, it won't be near Alice." Poe, who had remained motionless, let out another croak, this time louder, almost a call. He flew from the table, circling once over Sophia's head before landing softly on Arthur's shoulder, like a victorious guardian. His black eyes fixed on Sophia, an expression of silent triumph. Sophia looked at the raven, then at Arthur, at Mr. Elias, at Alice. The horror and despair on her face were palpable. Her facade had completely crumbled, and there was nothing left to hide. She was exposed, defeated. The mansion, once her stage of manipulation, now became her prison of shame. Peace, so distant for Alice and Mr. Elias, began to emerge on the horizon, but for Sophia, the future was only darkness. Sophia staggered back, struck by the finality of Arthur's words. The shock froze her veins, replacing the feverish heat of panic. "Arthur, please, don't do this. Where will I go? I'm your wife." She tried to approach him, extending her trembling hand, but Arthur recoiled a step, as if her mere proximity were contagious, repugnant. "You are not my wife," he corrected, his voice hard as stone, without any trace of the tenderness that had once deceived her. "You are a stranger who invaded my life and tried to destroy my family. I don't care where you go, but it won't be here. It won't be near my father, and above all, it won't be near Alice." Poe, who had remained motionless on Arthur's shoulder, let out another croak, this time louder, almost a call. He flew from the table, circling once over Sophia's head before landing softly on Arthur's shoulder, like a victorious guardian, his black eyes fixed on her with an expression of silent triumph. Sophia looked at the raven, then at Arthur, at Mr. Elias, who now watched her with surprising calm, and finally at Alice, whose large dark eyes reflected a mixture of fear and a newfound hope. "You can't do this to me," Sophia cried, her voice choked with tears and impotent rage. "I gave you the best years of my life. I took care of this house. I am Alice's mother." The lie, uttered with such conviction, sounded grotesque in the silence of the room. Arthur laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "You gave me nothing, Sophia, but lies and cruelty, and you were never Alice's mother. You were her tormentor. Your best years were spent manipulating, neglecting, and abusing. I owe you nothing, and you have no right to anything here." He gestured to the butler, who had remained discreetly at the door, observing the scene with contained gravity. "James, please escort Mrs. Sophia to her quarters. She has 1 hour to pack a bag with essentials. Then call a taxi. She is to leave the property immediately." James, a middle-aged man with a usually impassive expression, nodded with a look of understanding and even a touch of satisfaction. He approached Sophia, his presence imposing. "This way, Mrs. Sophia." Sophia felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. 1 hour, essentials, a taxi. The humiliation was overwhelming. She was not only expelled, but stripped of all dignity. She looked at Arthur, seeking a last spark of mercy, but his eyes were cold and relentless. "Arthur, please, think of all we had. I can change. I swear I'll change. Give me another chance." She fell to her knees, her hands clasped in supplication, a pathetic image of the haughty woman she had been minutes before. Arthur merely shook his head. "There is no us, Sophia. There never was. There was only your charade. And there will be no other chance. You had many, and you squandered them all on your cruelty. Now get up and go. Don't force me to call security." The mention of security was the final blow. Sophia knew Arthur wasn't bluffing. With a moan of despair, she stood up, her eyes bloodshot with hatred and resentment. She cast one last furious glance at Arthur, at Mr. Elias, and an especially venomous look at Alice, who shrank slightly under the intensity. "You'll regret this, Arthur," she hissed, her voice hoarse. "You'll regret underestimating me." Arthur did not respond. The main door closed with a soft click, but the sound resonated like thunder in the quietness that followed. A heavy and paradoxically light silence fell upon the room. It was the silence that follows a violent storm, when the air still vibrates with the memory of chaos, but the immediate threat is gone. Arthur felt the weight of years of deception and tension dissipate from his shoulders, as if an invisible armor had finally been removed. He took a deep breath, the air seeming purer, easier to inhale. Poe, who had remained on Arthur's shoulder, let out a soft croak, almost a murmur of contentment, and then took flight, circling once over the table before landing delicately on the windowsill, from where he observed the scene with his black, penetrating eyes. His mission was accomplished. "Father, are you well?" Arthur asked, kneeling beside Mr. Elias's wheelchair, his voice choked with guilt and relief. Mr. Elias was visibly exhausted, but with a faint smile on his lips, his eyes teary with deep emotion. Mr. Elias nodded slowly, extending a trembling hand to touch his son's face. "Better now, my son. Much better. The truth always sets you free." His voice was weak, but carried a dignity and peace Arthur hadn't seen in a long time. "Thank you, Arthur, for seeing, for believing." Arthur held his father's hand tenderly. "I'm so sorry, Father. I'm so sorry it took me so long, for not realizing what was happening right under my nose." "Don't blame yourself, my son," Mr. Elias said, squeezing Arthur's hand. "She was very cunning. And love sometimes blinds us. The important thing is that you saw it now and acted." Arthur nodded, swallowing hard. Then he turned to Alice, who looked at him with an expression of relief and cautious curiosity. The small figure, previously so withdrawn and frightened, now seemed a little less hunched, like a flower beginning to bloom after a long winter. He knelt beside her, opening his arms. "Daddy's here. You're safe. No one will hurt you anymore." Alice hesitated for an instant, as if unsure whether she could believe it. But then the barrier that had kept her isolated broke. She ran into her father's arms, burying her face in his shoulder and sobbing softly. They weren't sobs of fear, but of accumulated sadness that finally found an outlet, mixed with the overwhelming relief of feeling truly safe. Arthur hugged her tightly, feeling the small body tremble in his arms. He stroked her hair, kissed her forehead, feeling the comforting warmth of his daughter against him. It was a hug of healing, of promise, of a love that had been suffocated and now bloomed again. "I'm so sorry, my princess," he murmured, his own tears falling. "I'm so sorry for everything." Alice said nothing, just clung to him, as if afraid he might disappear. But the embrace in his arms was real, her father's scent was real, and for the first time in a long time, she felt a comforting warmth, the promise of a future without fear, without loneliness. The sunlight streaming through the windows seemed brighter, the shadows less dense. Peace finally had arrived, not as a whisper, but as a warm and lasting embrace. Arthur knew the road to recovery would be long, but with Alice and his father by his side, he was ready to face anything. He stood up, still holding Alice in his arms, and looked at Mr. Elias. "Father, let's take you to your room. You need to rest." Mr. Elias nodded, a deep weariness now evident on his face, but the serenity persisted. "Yes, my son. A good rest is all I desire." Arthur, with Alice still nestled on his shoulder, signaled to James, who reappeared discreetly at the door. "James, please help me take my father to his room and prepare a calming tea for him." "Immediately, Mr. Arthur," James replied, his voice soft, but with an efficiency that conveyed confidence. He approached the wheelchair, ready to assist. As James and Arthur maneuvered the wheelchair out of the dining room, Alice lifted her head from her father's shoulder. Her eyes, still a little swollen from crying, met Poe's, who watched from the windowsill. The raven tilted his head as if recognizing her and let out a low croak, almost a silent farewell. Alice, for the first time, felt no fear of the bird. There was something about him that now seemed protective, an unexpected ally. She even risked a small smile at him before snuggling back into her father. In Mr. Elias's room, Arthur helped him lie down on the bed. The old man seemed lighter, as if an invisible burden had been removed from his shoulders. He sighed, a sound of pure relief. "Sleep well, father," Arthur whispered, kissing his forehead. "I'll be here if you need anything." "I know, my son," Mr. Elias murmured, his eyes already half closed. "I know, and thank you for everything." Leaving his father in James's care, who was already preparing the tea, Arthur took Alice to her room. The room, once a solitary refuge, now seemed a space of promise. He sat her on the bed and knelt again, holding her small hands, his eyes level with hers. "Alice," he began, his voice soft and full of tenderness. "Are you hungry? Do you want something to eat? Or perhaps a warm bath to relax?" Alice shook her head slowly, her eyes fixed on his. Just want to be with you, Daddy." Arthur's heart ached. "And you will. Always. I promise. From now on, Daddy will always be here for you. No one will ever leave you alone again." He helped her take off her dinner clothes and dressed her in soft, warm pajamas. As he tucked her into bed, he noticed a crumpled drawing on the bedside table. A drawing of herself, small and alone, with a dark figure in the background. He picked it up, his heart heavy, but decided that for now the focus was comfort and security. He sat on the edge of the bed, and Alice immediately snuggled against him, her head on his chest, seeking the warmth and beat of his heart. He began to hum an old lullaby his own mother used to sing to him. The melody filled the room, soft and comforting, chasing away the shadows that had long inhabited that space. Alice, exhausted by the day's emotions, fell asleep quickly, her breathing light and regular against him. Arthur remained there for a long time, stroking his daughter's hair. Guilt still gnawed at him, a sharp pain for not having seen, for not having acted sooner. But at the same time, an iron determination formed within him. He would not only protect Alice and his father, but rebuild their lives, brick by brick, with love, attention, and truth. He would make sure that every day from now on was a step towards healing the wounds Sophia had inflicted. He knew there would be legal proceedings, that the mansion would need to be purified of all toxic memories, that Alice's and Mr. Elias's trust would take time to be fully restored. But looking at his daughter's serene, sleeping face, Arthur felt a renewed strength. Peace was not just the absence of conflict, it was the presence of love, security, and hope. And that night, in the quietness of Alice's room, Arthur felt that peace had indeed arrived. It was a beginning, a new and challenging, but deeply necessary beginning. He carefully stood up, making sure not to wake Alice. He gave her a final kiss on her forehead and covered her with the duvet. As he left the room, he looked back at the small, sleeping figure, and a silent promise formed in his heart. Never again. Never again would he allow darkness to touch his family. The mansion was silent, but it was no longer the oppressive silence from before. It was a silence of relief, of a held breath finally released. Arthur walked through the corridors, feeling the gentle breeze coming through the open windows, as if the air was being renewed. He stopped in the dining room, where the unfinished dinner was still on the table. James had already started cleaning, but Arthur dismissed him with a gesture. "Leave it, James. I'll take care of it." He looked at the place where Sophia had been sitting, and then at the place where Poe had deposited the empty bottle. The image was still vivid, but now there was no more anger, only a cold resolution. The truth had been revealed, and justice, in its own way, had been done. Arthur turned off the dining room lights, plunging it into darkness, and went up to his own room. He knew he wouldn't sleep any time soon. There was much to think about, much to plan. But for the first time in a long time, he felt he was on the right path. The darkness had been expelled, and the light, however faint, began to shine again in the mansion. Arthur entered his room, but the idea of sleeping was absurd. Adrenaline still pulsed in his veins, mixed with deep exhaustion and a torrent of emotions that refused to be silenced. He sat on the edge of the bed, his head in his hands, reliving every detail of the night. The empty bottle, Sophia's gaze, Alice's tears, the relief on his father's face. It was as if a veil had been torn, revealing the ugliness that hid behind the perfect facade. Guilt was an overwhelming weight. How could he have been so blind, so absorbed in his own world, so trusting of the woman he had sworn to love, to the point of not seeing the suffering of his own daughter and his father? Mr. Elias's words, "Love sometimes blinds us," echoed in his mind, but offered no comfort. Love should not blind one to the pain of the innocent. He stood up and walked to the window, watching the night sky begin to lighten with the first shades of grey and pink. The mansion, once a sanctuary of luxury and, secretly, of cruelty, now seemed to breathe differently. The silence was no longer the oppressive silence from before, but a silence of promise, of a held breath finally released. "I failed you," he whispered into the emptiness of the room, his voice hoarse with emotion. "I failed Alice, I failed my father." But along with the guilt, a steel resolution began to form. There was no point in dwelling on the past without acting in the present and future. He had seen the truth, and now it was his responsibility to fix what had been broken. First, the practical matters. Sophia. He needed to ensure she could no longer approach his family. Tomorrow, the first thing to do would be to contact his lawyer. Divorce would be inevitable, and he would make sure it was a quick and definitive process, with all necessary protective measures for Alice and Mr. Elias. There would be no negotiation, only the imposition of clear and unbreakable limits. Then, the mansion. Every corner, every object seemed to carry Sophia's shadow. He would need time to purify the environment, perhaps even redecorate the spaces, especially Alice's room, so that there would be no more memories of loneliness and fear. He thought of the toys Alice never touched, the dark corners where she hid. All of that would change, and most importantly, Alice and his father. Their recovery would be the absolute priority. For Alice, he promised himself to be a constant presence, an unwavering safe harbor. There would be games, stories, outings. He would take her outside, to see the world, to feel the sun, to laugh without fear. He would help her blossom to reclaim the childhood Sophia had tried to steal. For Mr. Elias, he would ensure not only medication and physical care, but also companionship, conversations, the respect and love he deserved. He would spend more time with him, listening to his stories, sharing moments. The dignity Sophia had tried to take from him would be fully restored. Arthur knew the path would be long and full of challenges. Alice's and Mr. Elias's trust would not heal overnight. Psychological wounds would not disappear in a day. But looking at the horizon that began to be tinged with gold, he felt a strength he didn't know he possessed. He was not alone. He had Alice, he had his father, and he had the truth. He wouldn't sleep, not yet. There was much to plan, much to rebuild. But, for the first time in a long time, Arthur felt he was on the right path. The darkness had been expelled, and the light, however faint, began to shine again in the mansion, promising a new day, a new beginning. He was ready for it. The first glimmer of morning, tinged with gold and rose, finally broke through the darkness. Painting the sky, Arthur watched from his bedroom window. He hadn't slept, but physical exhaustion was supplanted by a mental clarity and energy he hadn't felt in a long time. The resolution forged in the quietness of the night now seemed like a map, an unwavering guide for the days to come. He was ready for it, and now he was acting on it. The first step was swift and decisive. Before the sun was even high, Arthur was already on the phone with his lawyer, Dr. Almeida, a man of trust and discretion. Arthur's voice was firm, without hesitation, as he outlined the terms: immediate divorce, no negotiations, with maximum legal protection for Alice and Mr. Elias. He demanded a restraining order preventing Sophia from approaching the mansion or any family member. "I don't want her to have any kind of access, Dr. Almeida, not even by proxy. Let it be definitive and irrevocable." The lawyer, accustomed to Arthur's calculating coldness in the business world, perceived the personal intensity in his voice. "Understood, Mr. Arthur. I will handle everything with the utmost urgency and discretion." Hanging up the phone, Arthur felt a small weight lift, the first brick of a wall he would build to protect his own. Next, he went to Alice's room. The door was ajar. He gently opened it and entered. Alice slept deeply, nestled under the duvet, her face serene. The crumpled drawing he had seen the night before was now stored in the bedside table drawer, a small decision he had made to begin clearing the space of any shadow. He knelt beside the bed, watching her for a long moment. Guilt was still there, a persistent shadow, but the sight of his daughter at peace, even if for a brief period, fueled his determination. He promised himself that each day would be a conscious effort to erase painful memories and replace them with joy and security. In Mr. Elias's room, James was already awake, preparing breakfast. The old man was sitting in bed, reading a book, something Arthur hadn't seen him do in months. There was a different sparkle in his eyes, a vitality that seemed to have returned. "Good morning, Father," Arthur said, approaching and kissing his forehead. "Did you sleep well?" "Like an angel, my son," Mr. Elias replied, his smile genuine. "It seems the air in the mansion is lighter today, don't you think?" Arthur smiled back, a smile that reached his eyes for the first time in a long time. "I think so, Father. Much lighter." As James served breakfast, Arthur noticed the open window and, on the sill, the familiar silhouette of Poe. The raven watched the garden, but turned his head when Arthur approached. His black, intelligent eyes met Arthur's. There was no longer a sense of threat, only a silent complicity. "Thank you, my friend," Arthur whispered, and Poe let out a soft croak, almost a recognition. It was as if the raven was there to witness the new beginning, to ensure that darkness would not return. The mansion, indeed, seemed to breathe differently. The corridors no longer echoed with oppressive, cold silence. There was a lightness in the air, a promise. Arthur began to walk through the rooms. imagining the changes. Alice's room would be first. He would transform it into a sanctuary of colors and laughter, a place where imagination would flourish, free from fears. He thought of new toys, books, perhaps even a small secret garden for her. The journey would be long, Arthur knew. Healing would not happen overnight. But with each step he took, with each decision he made, he felt he was on the right path. And that morning, as the sun rose over the mansion, Arthur felt that peace had indeed arrived. It was a beginning. The mansion would no longer be a stage for cruelty, but a home, a true home. Arthur went down to the kitchen, where James was already preparing a special breakfast. He asked James to prepare an extra tray for Alice with pancakes and colorful fruits, something she loved but was rarely allowed under Sophia's watchful eye. He himself took the tray to Alice's room. She was still sleeping, but the sweet scent slowly woke her. Her blue eyes opened, first with the usual caution, but then with surprise to see her father there, smiling, with the breakfast tray. "Good morning, my little one," Arthur said softly, placing the tray on the bedside table. "I prepared a special breakfast for you, pancakes with honey and strawberries." Alice sat up, her eyes wide. She couldn't remember the last time her father had woken her with breakfast. "For me?" she whispered, almost incredulous. "Yes, for you. And afterwards, how about we go to the garden? We can plant some flowers if you like. Or perhaps read a new book," Arthur suggested, his voice full of a tenderness he had suppressed for too long. A small smile, timid at first, began to form on Alice's lips. "Flowers," she said, and the sound of her voice, a little louder, a little more hopeful, was music to Arthur's ears. He sat on the edge of the bed, watching her pick up a pancake. It was a small step, but for Arthur, it seemed like a giant leap. Later, in the garden, Arthur and Alice were kneeling in the dirt, planting sunflower seeds. Alice's hands were dirty, but her eyes shone with genuine joy. Poe watched from a nearby branch, a silent guardian. Mr. Elias, sitting on a garden bench, observed the scene with a satisfied smile. The mansion, once a place of shadows, was now filled with laughter and the promise of blooming sunflowers. Light had indeed returned. It wasn't just a matter of illumination, but a gentle melody that permeated every room, a warmth that dissolved the cold Sophia had left behind. The days that followed were a tapestry of small yet significant moments of healing. Arthur dedicated himself to Alice with an intensity he never knew he possessed. They spent hours in the garden, not just planting but exploring, inventing stories about the clouds and chasing butterflies. Alice's room, once a gloomy refuge, transformed into a universe of vibrant colors. Sky blue painted walls, a soft carpet with star patterns, and a shelf full of fairy tale books replaced the austere furniture. Arthur even set up a small telescope near the window, promising they would explore the stars together. "Daddy, look!" Alice exclaimed one day, pointing to a drawing she had made. It wasn't a drawing of a lonely girl, but of a family. Her, Arthur, Grandpa Elias, and even a small raven in the corner, all smiling under a bright sun. "It's us!" It was the first time he had seen Alice express so much joy and belonging in her art. "It's beautiful, my little one," he said, hugging her tightly. "The most beautiful I've ever seen." Mr. Elias, in turn, flourished. With regular medication and James's attention, his health improved daily. He read to Alice in the garden, their aged and childish voices mingling in tales of adventure and magic. Poe's presence, now seemingly a silent family member, was a constant. The raven would perch on Mr. Elias's windowsill or on a nearby branch when Arthur and Alice were in the garden, his observant eyes seeming to approve of the transformation. One afternoon, Arthur found his father in the study, flipping through an old photo album. "Remember this one, Arthur?" Mr. Elias asked, showing a photo of Arthur as a child, smiling openly. You were always such a joyful boy." Arthur sat beside him, his gaze fixed on the image. "I got a little lost, Father," he admitted, his voice low. "I let things blind me. Let ambition and the pursuit of a perfect image make me forget what truly mattered." Mr. Elias placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "The important thing is that you found your way back, my son. And in time. Alice needed you." "I know," Arthur replied, feeling a knot in his throat, "and I will never fail her again, nor you." The mansion, once a monument to coldness and silence, now resonated with life. Children's laughter echoed through the corridors, the aroma of freshly baked cakes came from the kitchen, and quiet conversations between Arthur and his father filled the air. Sophia was a distant memory, a shadow that had been expelled and no longer held power. The divorce papers were finalized quickly, and the restraining order ensured she could never disturb the peace that had been so hard won. Poe, on a sunny morning, flew away, not without first perching for a brief moment on Arthur's shoulder, letting out a croak that seemed like a farewell. Arthur knew the raven had fulfilled his mission, a dark guardian who brought the light. The healing journey was far from over, Arthur knew. Alice's scars would take time to disappear, but each day was a step forward. He was determined to build a future for his daughter and his father, a future where love and security were the unwavering pillars. The mansion, with its sunflowers beginning to sprout in the garden, was no longer just a luxurious property, but a true home. A home where innocence was protected, wisdom honored, and love finally reigned supreme. Darkness had been banished, and light now shone brighter than ever.